most wise and virtuous son. That's what the plaque read on the plinth where the statue of the 17th century slave trader Edward Colston once stood, with no mention of the suffering to human life that afforded him and Bristol such riches. When a photograph of me standing strong and proud on the spot that was occupied for so long by our city's most infamous slave trader, I had no idea of the journey that I was about to begin. I was fully aware that this city was built on the back of my enslaved ancestors, and I also knew about the countless and fruitless petitions to Bristol City Council to have the statue removed. But what I didn't know about were the institutions, organisations and companies that have profited and who continue to profit from the enslavement of African flesh. And to me, the most powerful of these are the Society of Merchant Venturers, a secretive organisation of Bristol's business elites. They formed in the 13th century and have been cheerleaders of Colston's philanthropy, with no mention of the suffering to human life at his hands. Colston joined the Society of Merchant Venturers and was a member for 40 years, and on his death he entrusted them £70,000, the equivalent of almost £1 million in today's money. Until a few years ago, they were known to keep Colston's hair and nail clippings as relics on display in their meeting hall. In 2018, a Bristol City Council project to add a second plaque to better contextualise Colston's role in the slave trade was embarked upon. It was proposed that the new plaque would include how Colston enslaved over 84,000 Africans, including 12,000 children, how he was involved in slave-produced sugar and the Spanish slave trade, and that he was a high official of the Royal African Company that had the monopoly on the British slave trade, and how as a Tory MP he defended the city's right to trade in enslaved Africans, and that any Bristolian who did not subscribe to his religious or political beliefs were not permitted to benefit from his charity. So is it any wonder that during the consultation, the Society of Merchant Venturers successfully sanitised the wording, removing historical facts, and continued to praise Colston as a philanthropist, drawing the project to a standstill. So you can only imagine my surprise when a week after the toppling, the Society of Merchant Venturers put out a statement saying that the toppling of Colston was right for Bristol. The Society of Merchant Venturers held Thanksgiving Day services, and the Colston Girls' School held annual Commemoration Day services, where students would read passages from Colston's will, wear his favourite flower, and be given a Colston bun as a treat. Now imagine being a black girl at that school, being made to celebrate a man who kidnapped, tortured and killed your ancestors. It beggars belief, but it happened here in Bristol until about 6 years ago. Yet here they still are, with a stronghold as tight as ever in the city that I call home. Their members are trustees, board of directors of major businesses across the city, including this boat. Since being recognised as a woman who stood tall and proud on the spot where the slave trader once stood, the trolls were out in full force, with the repeated comment that Colston was Bristol's best philanthropist, so his statue should be reinstated. And my reply to them is that Jimmy Savile also gave hundreds and thousands of pounds to charity, so should we have a statue erected of him in his honour? On the 7th of June 2020, I was one of 10,000 people who took to the streets to demand an end to systemic racism, sparked by the brutal, disturbing murder of George Floyd. It was my first ever protest, and it would change the course of my life forever. During the protest, the statue of Edward Colston was toppled by protesters, and although I missed the toppling, I arrived just in time to see Colston on the floor, his face daubed in red paint, with a box of Jamaican jam and juice on his chest and an afro pick, on his head. And it was a sight to behold. And after witnessing Colston being dragged and rolled through the streets and thrown into the river, and as I approached the empty plinth, I felt an overpowering urge to climb onto it, which was no easy feat. And with a borrowed shoulder and a shimmy up the plinth, I landed stomach down. And only then did I realise my fear of heights. But there was no going back. The cheers from the crowd below encouraged me to stand and overcome my fear. And once on my feet, I raised my head to the sky and I raised my fist in the Black Power salute. And in that moment, I felt a surge of power. My thoughts were with George Floyd, the enslaved, my mother, my daughter, my sister, and to black people who are forced every day to fight for justice and equality. A photograph was taken and posted onto social media. It led to a collaboration with the world-renowned artist Mark Quinn to create a statue of me in that same pose, which would underscore the impact of that moment. In the small hours of Wednesday, the 15th of July, a surge of power, Jen Reid, was placed onto the empty plinth that brought with it worldwide media attention. My image and the statue would become synonymous with the Black Lives Matter here in the UK. To this day, I feel that the plinth has been cleansed of the slave trader, and regardless of what stood there before, I defy anybody not to remember who stood there after. Regardless of it only standing for 24 hours, me, a now fearless, righteous, defiant black woman who stood in the Black Power salute on the empty plinth. I made a deliberate choice to dress as Angela Davis that day, because as far as I was concerned, what had changed since the Black Panther Party was formed in 1966? In their fight for civil rights, they confronted politicians and protected black citizens from police brutality. Many activists throughout history have made an impact on society by challenging oppressive systems and advancing the rights of black people. Figures such as Marcus Garvey, John Lewis, Ida B. Wells, to name a few, have all made changes. So if I can inspire others in my own way to make a change, it would be wrong of me to sit and stay silent. When all of this came about, I would see my name on TV, Jen Reid activist. And I thought, what had I done to warrant such a title? And as I look back throughout my life, I remember withdrawing my gold-winning athleticism services from my school track meetings due to detentions being dished out by racist teachers. And in retaliation, I had great pleasure in withdrawing my services and watching my school lose. I've even lost jobs, one for daring to redress a colleague who thought it was her God-given right to touch my hair. So yeah, I am an activist, and I probably have been since I was a child. Activism is about speaking out and standing up for what is right against what is wrong. The world looked in, Bristol had spoken, we were heard. After the toppling of Colston, one of the most inspiring things that I noticed was the ripple effect around the world. Statues and monuments of Confederate soldiers, colonialists and slave masters that had stood for over 100 years were either toppled, vandalised or removed. The Reverend Al Sharpton mentioned the toppling of Colston at George Floyd's funeral. I see white people marching all over the world. I see grandchildren of slave masters tearing down slave master statue over there in England and put it in the river. In the UK, a total of 69 statues and monuments were removed. Here in Bristol, schools, a music hall, and public houses whose name all contained Colston were changed. As I know from the ripple effects of my own image going global, statues and monuments and arts hold power. They can ignite meaningful conversations. But when colonialists are placed in prominent positions, they are still revered and they allow racists to feel entitled and justified to cling on to their own beliefs. Statues such as these belong in museums where their shameful histories can be told in its full context. A study by Unlike UK found that only 2% of statues, public statues, are of people of ethnic minority. How can anybody not see the significance of this? Imagine how powerful a more diverse landscape could have on future generations, especially young black children as they aspire to greatness. It would also serve as a reminder of the historical contributions and achievements made by black individuals here in the UK. Because representation matters. Bristol City Council were quick to bring charges against those that had toppled the statue. 4 people faced trial who would later become known as the Colston Four, and they faced trial at Bristol City Crown Court on the 13th of December 2021 and faced the charges of criminal damage. On behalf of the 10,000 people that marched that day, there are many arguments that were put to the jury. The lawyer Tom Wainwright put to the jury that if you have a cancer like Colston festering in your city, only once you cut it out can the city heal. The attorney Raj Chadha stated that it was shameful Bristol City Council did not take down the statue that caused such offence, but it was equally shameful that they then helped the prosecution of these defendants. The defence successfully demonstrated that the real offenders were not the Colston Four, but Bristol City Council and the Society of Merchant Venturers, who had done everything in their power to deliberately obscure and sugarcoat the reputation of Colston as a mass murderer, and they didn't see fit to uphold the law. The trial lasted 4 days, and it took the jury 3 hours to return a verdict of not guilty, based on the fact that the statue of Colston warranted an indecent display under the Indecent Displays Act 1981. My story is a testament to the power of individuals to make a difference, to stand up and speak out for what they believe in. It's a reminder that history is not only made by those people in power, but by everyday people who make a stand. And to quote Angela Davis, I challenge citizens of the world to imagine the future not narrowed by their own lifetimes or perspectives, but in a way that brings us closer together as a global community. And I'd like you to ask yourself a question. What side of history would you like to be on? Mic drop.